They said she was the most elegant woman in the kingdom, but no one had seen her face in years behind silks, veils, and a jeweled mask. She hid something too horrifying for the court to accept, until one day, the mask slipped in. With it fell the last illusion of beauty, power, and pride that if you're drawn to the darkest secrets behind royal portraits. Hit subscribe and stay until the end, because this queen's final reveal was never meant for the world to see. The royal court stood frozen as the grand doors creaked open as she entered, tall, graceful, draped in gold, and silenced. But it wasn't her gown that stole attention. It was the ornate mask, etched in silver, edged with velvet, covering every inch of her face. If she hadn't removed it in public for over 7 years, that whispers followed her wherever she walked. Some said she wore it for vanity, others for vanity lost, but none dared ask. Because even the king himself had ordered, let no one question the queen's appearance. And so, the mask remained. But the truth it concealed was beginning to rot beneath. Before the mask, there had been legends that the queen's beauty was the kind poets wept over and painters begged to capture: that skin like ivory, lips like blush roses, and eyes that lit entire halls. That noblemen traveled across borders for just one glimpse. Even enemies spoke of her as the jewel of the realm. But beauty like that doesn't stay untouched by time or fate. That one winter, a mysterious illness struck. That it began with a fever, then faint rashes. And within weeks, her face was changing, melting beneath its own skin. The court physicians tried every remedy known to man: herbal pastes, elixirs, even gold dust. Nothing worked. That each morning, her mirror offered her less and less of the woman she once was. Until one day, she smashed the mirror. And ordered a mask to be made. That it was no ordinary mask. That crafted by the kingdom's finest goldsmith. It shimmered with delicate filigree, beautiful enough to distract, and thick enough to conceal. Behind it, the queen re-entered her court like a vision reborn. That no one dared ask why she wore it. They bowed, they smiled, but behind her back, the whispers began. Some said it was vanity, others cursed. She tightened her circle, banished mirrors from the palace, and demanded absolute silence on the matter. Every portrait thereafter showed the mask, never her skin. But she knew every time someone looked at her too long, too closely, she felt their eyes searching for what lay beneath. And in private, she feared they were right to wonder, because even she hadn't seen her own face in over a year. The royal corridors began to change. Heavy incense burned day and night. Jasmine, myrrh, clove. But underneath those sweet clouds, a stench lingered, a faint, rotting edge that no perfume could mask for long. That the servants noticed it first. While dressing her, they winced as they leaned closer. That some fainted. Others were dismissed for disrespect. But one maid, brave or foolish, whispered the truth to a guard. She's decaying, and she knows it. Soon after, that maid was never seen again. And yet the rumors grew louder. The queen's chambers were sealed tight. Windows bolted. No fresh air. Only darkness, silk, and that mask. That some believed her illness was divine punishment. Others claimed sorcery. But only a few guessed the real horror. She was alive, but her face was dying. Piece by piece, there was one object the queen banished from her chambers entirely. Mirrors. Not a single reflective surface remained in the room where she slept. That she feared them, not out of vanity, but out of terror. Terror that one accidental glance would reveal just how far the decay had gone. It wasn't just her skin anymore. Her lips cracked open when she spoke, bleeding beneath thick powders. Her teeth, once pearly and sharp with royal pride, were loosening, one by one. And her right cheek, hidden always by shadow, was rumored to be held together by paste and silk. That at night, she'd wake screaming, not from dreams, but from the pain of her own flesh pulling away from bone. She ordered her physicians to sew silk into her skin, to hold it in place, she said. But they couldn't hold time. And even her mask couldn't hold the truth. The stench had become unbearable. Not to her. She had grown used to it. But to those around her, the air reeked of something sweet and wrong. That a thick perfume clung to the queen's presence like fog. That scented oils soaked into her gowns, Sachets of lavender and camphor were sewn into her sleeves. Even the corridors she passed through were sprayed in advance. It was more than royal vanity. It was camouflage, a desperate cover-up of the rot beneath her beauty that courtiers whispered behind fans that one maid fainted while dressing her and another refused to touch the queen's mask without gloves. But no one dared speak aloud. What they all suspected. Their queen was not merely ill, she was decaying. While still alive, yet she walked with poise as she smiled when required. And when anyone commented on her scent, she'd reply with a cold smile. Loyalty should never hinge on the senses. By now, the mask had become part of her. No one, servant, physician, or noble, was permitted to see beneath it, even in sleep. The silver faceplate stayed fastened, its inner lining was padded with velvet, its edges sealed tight. With wax to prevent any scent from escaping. When she bathed, veils were hung thick around the tub. When she dined, only the softest foods were served. Nothing that required too much chewing, because movement hurt. Because behind that sculpted silver, her jaw had stiffened, her lips had darkened, her teeth, what remained, ached constantly. And yet, she refused to show weakness. The foreign ambassadors returned home speaking of a queen so regal, they dared not meet her eyes, but none knew they hadn't seen her eyes, only black glass orbs set into a mask that never blinked. She ruled, faceless, but not powerless, in the grand halls. Her presence was still unquestioned, but behind brocade curtains, the whispers had begun to spread like smoke. Did you hear? The queen hasn't been seen without that mask in years. They say her face was cursed by a jealous rival. No, it was poison, served by her own sister. Servants avoided looking directly at her. Advisors lowered their eyes when she passed. And in the candlelit corridors, even loyal guards grew uneasy when night fell. Because sometimes, faint sounds came from her chambers, not screams, not sobs, but the strange metallic creak of the mask, shifting. One court painter was summoned to make a new portrait. He arrived with his brushes and canvas, and left pale, shaking, refusing to ever return. He never said what he saw, but soon after, he renounced painting altogether and joined a monastery in silence. One winter, a foreign prince came to court, a potential ally, or perhaps a future husband. He brought gifts, flattery, and bold curiosity, but what he wanted most was a glimpse beneath the mask. During a private dinner, he leaned forward and whispered, "Your Majesty, surely such beauty needs no silver veil?" The queen's gaze locked with his, still, unreadable. She said nothing. Instead, she reached for her goblet, sipped slowly, and let the silence stretch until it choked. Later that night, the prince was found vomiting in his chambers. He claimed he'd been cursed, said he'd seen something move beneath her skin. He returned home the next day, his alliance and signed. And soon after, his ships mysteriously caught fire at sea. The message was clear. Some veils are not meant to be lifted. Servants whispered of one terrifying night that a maid, newly appointed, was dusting the queen's chamber. She moved too quickly, accidentally shifting the mirror that hung near the bed. And in that fleeting moment, the queen saw herself. Not the mask, not the titles, but the decaying truth beneath it all. A shriek shattered the stillness of the palace. The guards burst in, only to find the mirror cracked, and the queen collapsed on the floor. Trembling, they carried her away, silent and pale. For hours she said nothing. Then finally, a whisper escaped her lips. Even glass forgets what it once reflected. From that night onward, all mirrors were banned from her quarters. Not a single reflective surface remained. She would rather live blind than face the echo of her own ruin. That winter, the queen announced a royal banquet. Golden invitations were sent across the land. Dukes, lords, even foreign envoys were summoned. But when the night came, not a single noble entered the hall. The word had spread of her strange appearance, her hollow gaze, her rotting skin beneath that cursed mask. Some claimed she was cursed, others feared catching whatever plagued her soul. The banquet table, long and glimmering, sat untouched. Dozens of silver platters steamed under empty air, and at the far end sat the queen. Alone. Her mask glittered under candlelight. She lifted her goblet, hands trembling, and made a toast to loyalty, even if it must be worn by ghosts. No one replied. Just the wind, gently extinguishing the first candle. After the failed banquet, the palace began to change, not visibly, but in sound, in mood, in air that made swore they heard soft weeping through the stone corridors. Guards reported murmurs at midnight, voices that weren't their. And the queen? She no longer walked the halls by day, only at night did her silhouette drift, gliding past candlelit arches, her mask glinting like bone. It was said she spoke to portraits, and sometimes to no one at all. Tell me, she once whispered in an empty hall, if a queen rots in silence, does her crown still shine? Some claimed she had gone mad, others said grief had simply outlived her mind. But one thing was certain: the palace no longer belonged to the living. Weeks passed, the queen's mask, once flawless, ivory and gold, began to decay with her. Tiny fractures appeared near the cheek. The servants dared not look directly, but they noticed it, that smell, that sickness. And then, one stormy night, it happened during a rare council meeting. Lightning struck close, the thunder jolted her. She flinched, and the mask slipped, just a glimpse. But it was enough to silence the room. One advisor gasped. Another turned away. The flesh beneath had turned dark, sunken, barely human. But she didn't cover it. She looked each nobleman in the eye, as if daring them to flee. No mask can hide what loyalty has cost me, she said. And in that moment, power returned to her voice. Not beauty, not youth, but something far more terrifying. Unyielding command. In the face of decay, the queen no longer left her chambers. Each night, the grand dining hall remained undisturbed, except for the soft clink of silverware behind heavy doors. Inside, she dined alone. Or so it seemed, but across from her sat the same decaying body of the king, dressed in regal garments. Slumped in the same chair he once ruled from. Servants no longer entered, but the food was left at the threshold and taken only when the halls were empty again. Those who dared to peek through the keyhole said the air shimmered with candle smoke and sorrow. The queen would speak in whispers, raise a goblet, and laugh softly, as if still in conversation with him. Sometimes she'd toast, sometimes she'd cry, but she always finished dinner, always across from him, as though death had become part of her routine. And beyond the walls, the court waited for silence to fall permanently. One morning, the palace awoke to stillness, not the quiet of sleep, but the silence of something ending. The queen's chamber doors were sealed shut. Days passed. No one came in, no one came out. When they finally forced their way inside, the scene was like a portrait frozen in mourning. At the head of the long table sat the queen, upright, eyes open, and beside her, the decayed shell of her beloved king. Her mask had fallen to the floor, cracked down the center. And beneath it, her face told a story too terrible for ink, half-rotted, yet strangely calm. As if she had finally become one with the death she'd been dining beside. No crown adorned her head, only silence. Whispers say she died with a smile, not from madness, but from never letting go. And so ends the tale of the royal queen who dined with the dead, a woman whose love defied time, and whose sorrow built a kingdom of ghosts.